An anti-fascist podcast about the far right. We're here today talking about the most recent two demonstrations that have happened in London, anti-fascist demonstrations and their corresponding Free Tommy demonstrations. We're here with Ella.
Hello.
From the Feminist Anti-fascist Assembly, and with Lily.
Hello.
From London Anti-fascist Assembly.
And so, I'm here too.
Yeah. Fine. My name's Sam. Alex, you just heard. There have been two anti-fascist mobilisations in August of 2019. One on the 3rd, one on the 24th. They're both against Free Tommy demos. So Free Tommy happened last year as well, 2018. It's a series of really quite large demonstrations happening in central London. This year was a lot smaller. Maybe we could talk about why that is, like what's happened in the far right. What's happened in the far right that means that they are now less operationally effective than they were in 2018?
So I think there's several factors going on. I feel like the loss, I think as we said before, the loss of Tommy Robinson's 1 million like Facebook page has gone a long way. They've tried to compensate. They've got this email list, they've set up their own website, and they've got this Telegram channel, but it's just a matter of scale, just much smaller than what it was last time. Like 50,000 people on a Telegram is cool, but then Telegram people don't check their Telegrams as often, and this, the difference between 50,000 and a million means that the outlying effects of people sharing and recommending and the outlying waves of people getting drawn into this thing is much, much less. We did see that in a knock-on effect on the 3rd, which I actually attended. I kind of walked around the Free Tommy demonstration and talked to a bunch of people, and it seemed to me that it was reverting to like the older crowd of like more committed Tommy fans from back from the EDL. It was much older. In kind of, age composition, and obviously extremely white, but there was like it was very much felt like an echo of the EDL rather than like some kind of vital force on the British far right.
There was also like an immense sense of confusion, I thought, in that demo in the far right. So I saw a lot of people walking around. I was also kind of in the crowd with the Free Tommy people. There was people with like "Don't tread on me," this kind of snake meme, "No step on snake." Great meme. There's like a kind of a sense that there was just like a total political chaos about like who was here and who wasn't there, in the way that there was no real sense of focus, like there had been on the DFLA's focus on like grooming gang issues or the kind of like supposed grooming gang stuff. And there was no focus like there was on the Free Tommy stuff. It just felt like a kind of a random collection of people who'd been brought out onto the street without any kind of clear political purpose. That was on the 3rd. That's maybe why there was such a even smaller turnout on the 24th, 3 weeks later.
Yeah, I really think they've lost a lot of their political coherence that they had kind of rallied around the kind of supposed kind of grooming gangs, and they had like quite a clear political line at one point, which I think meant people were willing to mobilise because they actually were quite a lot less explicitly far right, although they were still coming out with a lot of kind of racist, very far right ideas. It was less obvious in some ways. So they were drawing much broader crowds, and I think that like political disunity and no real clear message. So the one we had last weekend was just, it was supposedly a Free Tommy demo, but it was at the BBC, and most of the chants were about the BBC being paedophiles. For like, there was no clear like rallying message behind any of it. I think that in part, that kind of political falling apart has in part come from some really successful organising in the latter half of last year, which was not just about blocking people on the streets, but about developing really clear counters to those narratives, which they then kind of lost control of quite quickly. So you see with kind of Feminist Anti-fascist Assembly coming in and like actually intervening on what they're saying around the idea of grooming gangs.
Absolutely, and also even like the Free Tommy kind of message as it is today, like, with the whole idea about contempt of court and what he did and the reporting thing, it's much more convoluted. It's much more kind of taken back from like those kind of quite vital on the far right issues like grooming gangs or even Brexit. It's kind of a bit wonky with the law, like a legal wonk kind of situation where people are having to like interpret like an illegal, arcane legal process in order to like construe some kind of reason why Tommy Robinson is unjustifiably persecuted. I mean, if you look at the bare facts of the case, as we laid out in a previous episode, whatever you think about prisons, he'd clearly committed an offence serious enough to be warranted sent to prison, and it's very difficult. It's very easy for his very hardcore fan base to like take it on. Tommy's a political prisoner. We love Tommy, but for a wider layer of that kind of crowd that he pulled last year, like the UKIP crowd, who are now like much less pro Tommy, it's much harder to accept in many ways, I feel.
It's also just a repeat. Right? It's just like, we've done this. We did this last summer. What are we doing? There's no progression, there's no movement. And of course, in that intervening time period, what's also appeared for the far right, which of course was also visible, is December 2018, last year, which was the kind of the Brexit kind of crunch time. Though I think there's a sense in which the kind of the hopes of the far right have maybe even shifted back towards kind of political normalcy, in that they believe because they have this sense, as you can see from their conflation of like the BBC with like the court system, with like, prisons and all these kind of things, the idea that there's a kind of huge state conspiracy, because they believe these things are all interconnected. They also, I think, to some extent believe that Boris Johnson becoming Prime Minister is a way of them getting what they actually want about, say, Brexit. And so the issue has shifted. Tommy Robinson is no longer this kind of like thing, or this person who's able to mobilise the far right, because there are other more pressing concerns. And Tommy Robinson doesn't have doesn't have anything particularly novel to say on like the issue of Brexit. So it just seems like the far right kind of shifted their attentions. Maybe you're looking sceptical about that, Alex.
I wasn't even listening to what you're saying. So.
Classic stuff. That goes in the podcast.
No, it doesn't. It should go in the podcast. I was miles away. Something Brexit.
Okay, Lily, your thoughts on the falling apart of the far right? Or at least the Free Tommy stuff.
Tommy Robinson never had any clear politics. Like, there was never a really, he's not a political thinker. He's just, selling himself as a brand.
Okay, but that brand is attached to, like, some quite specific notions often. Or it's attached to an ability to mobilise in a kind of, like, unexpressed, effective, kind of, like, emotions-based, like, racist terrain. So I think like there is a political content to Tommy Robinson, like quite like a definite one. It's able to mobilise things that are actually really, really diverse, because most people on the far right don't have a really well organised system of thinking. But I do think there is like political content to what he does.
I don't really. Because the thing is like he's tried to get these like more respectable political positions, and that never works because there is no clear message. He's able to mobilize, but there is no it doesn't fit into any of the existing parties, and he's too much of a it's just all about him. So it doesn't really I don't see him as a political figure.
So I think that it is all about him in like one quite specific way. Tommy Robinson is a kind of like a lens through which like people can see the world, and he positions himself as the controller of the lens. So he positions himself as the kind of the person who is kind of colouring in everything you see, and he positions himself as the kind of political authority. That goes through every single level of the way he operates, right? So at the level of kind of like where he holds the camera on a live stream, like it's all him. Even when there's events happening like immediately in front of him, he never shows you anyone else on the live stream. It's just him. You're just watching this man over and over again. I think that's what he's doing at kind of every level. But I think that lens has like an enormous amount of political content.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. And I think Tommy Robinson actually operates in a different way to a lot of the people who have kind of led the Free Tommy movement, where I think he does think far more clearly about kind of what political image he wants to get across, what tactics he wants. I think that might be why they called off the official demo on the 24th, because I think Tommy Robinson gets worried about image and has really thought through kind of in a very political way what the image he wants is. In a way, I think people like Danny Tomo maybe do far less. I think they're far less strategic thinkers. So yeah, I think Tommy is different from a lot of... I get what you're saying. He's not a party political person, but I think he does have very clear political goals as well as personal ones.
I think, yeah... Well, you can definitely see that if we just kind of split up the 3rd and the 24th, I feel like if Tommy Robinson had been much more involved in the 3rd, or at least had been organising his own demonstration on the outside, then you wouldn't have had this kind of chaotic kind of everyone, all the far right running around different versions of Oxford, different places around Oxford Circus, occasionally throwing chairs at police. It would have been much more stage managed. It would have worked much more closely with the police. And I don't think Tommy Robinson really trusts his lieutenants, which are Danny Thomas, like you said, Avi Yemeni, and Richard Inman, to be able to do that kind of negotiation with the police. Big Mark. Just going back to what you're saying about him not being a political figure, I feel like in many ways we talked about this a bit on the podcast with James Poulter, in that he's not like a committed ideologue, in that I personally think he'd be quite happy to drop the whole far right activist media personality game and go and live in obscurity once he's made enough money. And that's opposed, and he's not trying to advance a particular political cause or movement. He's kind of building himself as like an avatar, a far right celebrity. But you can contrast him with people like Nick Griffin, who is, complete obscurity now and has been for the last 9 years. Is still like plotting and thinking through like kind of how to advance a fascist cause. He recently got kicked out of Hungary for doing this, and he's a thinker on the far right, and he's like really very committed and he will be for the rest of his life. Tommy Robinson, I feel, is less so. And I think that's maybe something of what you were saying.
Yeah, because I don't think that there is like a clear, path through what he's saying, and it always changes. Like at the moment, it's like he's this martyr that has been unjustly imprisoned, and it's against, like the freedom of speech and all that bullshit. But when Brexit was more usable, it was about Brexit and the bad deal and Brexit, at the same time being a good thing and a bad thing.
But there's a coherent English nationalism here in which like obviousness is betrayed by like the establishment, right? And it's betrayed by the establishment because of not because like a conspiracy. I don't think he's like he's not like a great replacement style conspiracist.
I mean, I think he is actually. Like, he's very careful about his language, as you would be like a media figure. But he has a couple of times in some of his YouTube videos like talked explicitly about the Great Replacement, about Muslims coming in, and he's used that particular phrase as well. This is just around the time when Generation Identity were kind of courting him to be the leader of the UK branch. I feel there is a kind of like overarching kind of conspiratorial aspect to his politics, which is a much harder sell to like a broader range of like reactionary British people than just kind of appealing to their racist sentiments about Muslims or their fears about being moved out of their communities by immigrants or whatever. There is like a wider kind of pedo state QAnon style thing that he's going for, of which he is the heroic exposer of, and the reason why he's being persecuted. Underlying a lot of these politics, the grooming gangs gets covered up by the local government and the state, and the BBC have their part in covering it up, and white people being replaced in their own homes by people from Somalia and Pakistan, and that kind of like extra layer of conspiracy is much harder for like your Middle England village dweller to accept in many ways, especially when they're living in their white only village and haven't seen a Muslim for a long time.
Which is like one of the reasons why there was a kind of a big kind of fracture with the DFLA, right? Who were like less amenable to this kind of conspiratorial thinking, I think.
Yeah, and I think coming back to what we were talking about originally of why we're seeing numbers drop as that comes more to the fore of the movement, or chicken and egg, I guess, what comes first, the fact they turn more towards that, or the fact their numbers are dropped, so the people left are the people who, there was a lot of QAnon stuff out on the steps of the Portland Place at the weekend.
Do you know anything? Do you want to quickly explain about QAnon?
I don't know the details, so someone else might be better placed to explain it.
Sam has been keeping up on all QAnon news since it started. You're really into it, aren't you?
Okay, so QAnon is an online conspiracy that is claims that there is a kind of a very tangled web of conspiracy that is going on inside the American state and indeed across the world, but mostly fixated on the American state. and it began sometime in the early Trump presidency or just before. And the idea is basically that this conspiracy is being fought by Donald Trump, who is single-handedly kind of playing 4D, 5D, 6D chess, and he is taking down this conspiracy. And this is, I think, a kind of a way in which the far-right figure who is kind of put upon by the state, like Tommy Robinson wants to present himself as, the way that figure can continue to understand themselves as persecuted by the state, even when they have state power. And so fascism, even in its like state form, I don't think Trump's a fascist necessarily. Fascism, even in its state form, can maintain its sense of being a movement, or it contain its like vitality as like a movement form. That's my sense of how QAnon functions in the fascist landscape. Not that people who are in QAnon are necessarily fascist. What kind of conspiracy marks out on the far right? What it tells you about someone is not necessarily that they're just anti-Semitic, but that they are like a much more committed ideologue, I think, than people who are not conspiratorial. Because in order to think about conspiracy requires you to have like a sense of the kind of the world stage of politics on which like kind of dark forces are moving.
And there's an underlying conspiracy to a lot of fascist thinking, and it always goes down to this cable of Jewish people controlling the world, and that is like the conspiracy theory of our time.
Totally, yeah. So I didn't go to the demo on the 24th because I passed out, had an epileptic fit, had to go to hospital. Shout out to the NHS. Shout out to my sister for taking me to hospital. Pick up the NHS. Let's talk about the third.
Yeah, I think the third was interesting. It was lower numbers than we saw at the end of last year, but it was still 500 people, which is considerably bigger than we were last summer. If we go back a bit further, we basically had two really big mobilisations towards the end of last year, but before that we were smaller than we were on the third. So I think not seeing it as a complete loss of numbers is a good thing. I think on the third we were tactically really solid. We kept people safe. No one was arrested, but we were massively policed. And that's actually the same is true of both, of the level of public order policing we're seeing against us is enormous. It's the TSG, the riot cops, it's vans, it's horses. Yeah. And the current strategy, as far as I can tell from the police force, is keep really tight around an anti-fascist bloc and basically let the far right wander around central London, which is obviously a tactic to keep the groups apart, but also obviously has quite a clear political bent to it from the Met.
Well, yeah, I mean, again, that's different to October, where basically a load of groups led by FAF managed to like manoeuvre themselves under the eye of the police, basically to block the DFLA march, which is something which was not possible on the 3rd or the 24th, if we'd had the same numbers. I feel, yeah, I mean. I feel a bit conflicted about this, like, kind of police protects the fascist kind of narrative, because
I mean, they're saying the same. They're saying that the far right, their rhetoric is that the police are, treat us much nicer than them and block them from doing anything.
Who but the police say the far right do?
Yeah, the far right say the police do.
The police do.
That the police protect us.
The anti-fascists.
Yeah. And the police are, the police are anti-fascists.
I mean, these kind of narratives,
dirty lefties.
These kind of things. I know it's a really, really favourite chant, and police protect who protects the fascists. But on the 3rd, the police weren't particularly protecting the fascists. Really, they were arresting the fascists, and the fascists were throwing chairs at them. It was quite an anti-police demonstration in that kind of regard. And I wasn't there for the 24th, so I can't speak to that. But I feel like the police. The public or the police are trying to keep the peace, and they keep it extremely violently. I don't feel like there's kind of one protecting one side more than the other. They want to keep groups apart. They want to keep people buying stuff in Oxford Street. So on the 3rd, the fascists had a kind of free reign around London. There's this. People should go look at the Russia Today live stream, which is 7 hours long, and they end up on the South Bank and then going up another bridge. It's quite an extensive kind of trek across London, and so the 24th, how would you kind of contrast it to the 3rd, and what kind of went down there?
So I had to leave halfway through the day on the 24th, so I can't speak for the whole demo, but I think the real difference was numbers. Have we seen a huge loss of numbers over 3 weeks? I think that could have been a lot of different things. I think it was partly the messaging becomes confused when the far right call off their official demo. We say ours is still on, but I think a lot of people go, if they've called off theirs, their numbers are going to be low, which was true. I think we've all seen a huge loss in numbers. I think, the far right since last summer have gone down from 15,000 to maybe 100 at a push, which is obviously a huge win, but we do need to look at what went on with our numbers on Saturday. Because then it's very easy for police to essentially push people onto the pavement in a kettle and just hold it out. And I think that's essentially what happened, which is obviously where we could see the far right on the steps of Portland Place, but they were on the steps of Portland Place and we were on the pavement. It's a demoralising place to be. But I think we probably, and Lily, you can correct me on this if I'm wrong, I think probably we outnumbered them still.
Yeah, on the 3rd, we were outnumbered by the far right, but on the 24th, we outnumbered them because we were probably 200, 250 at a push, and they were barely 100, if even that, probably less. Somebody counted them and said at one point that there were 60.
I mean, it's not a good look for them if they can literally be counted.
What's next for wLAFA? Where are you going to go from here?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to have a debrief tomorrow, go through everything, compare it with the 24th, see what the tactics are that we need to change to be more successful, how we get more people aboard, how we do these public education sessions, organize more open assemblies. And FAF has also talked about having another assembly, and people are quite up for that. And they were suggesting in September, but let's see.
I feel like
it feels very, very soon, but I feel it's really important to revitalize FAF and have this a feminist look and a feminist political analysis of the far right to also be more effective in our rhetoric and to keep pushing that as well. But the thing is, the same people can't organize everything.
I think also looking out for wLAFA, hopefully for some of the more local organising. I think that's what people have been wanting to do for a while and kept on kind of getting sidetracked into big demo organising. So I'm hopeful that also people might be able to go to meetings near them.
There was an attack on Owen Jones about 2 weeks ago. He was attacked
on his birthday.
On his birthday by some people from the far right, and
I mean, I think he was assumed that they were far right.
But there were. I mean, okay. There was a bit in the chat in the Telegram group that we were talking about earlier, Tony Roberts' Telegram group, where someone says we need to teach Owen Jones a lesson, something like that. And I kind of wondered why on the 24th, because my sense of why the numbers drop from last year is mostly about political messaging and the lack of political messaging and the lack of a sense of a coherent opposing something coherently.
Yeah.
And in part that's a problem because Danny Tomo has absolutely no sense of what he's doing. So he doesn't have a political message. He just
Danny Tomo got arrested on the 3rd.
Yeah. So it's just this thing here is now happening.
Yeah.
He has no sense of it. Why it's happening, and therefore it's very difficult to oppose politically.
Yeah, no, sharp political messaging was much easier when you had the DFLA's grooming gang narrative. We could then come back with really sharp counter messaging. When, like we were saying earlier, their political coherence has been destroyed. It makes it much harder for us to...
This is epitomised in Danny Thomas' impromptu speech he did after the sentencing, where it was we're going to get all the groups together. We're going to get Britain First and UKIP and, For Britain and biker gangs, the biker gangs for whatever. And it's just a laundry list of all the people, most of whom hate each other and would never come together to support Tommy Robinson. It's kind of that kind of political lack of ability, which is symptomatic of Danny Thomas' kind of bad decision making across his life, I feel.
Oh, actually, I've got something else to say about the 24th. I think as we see far-right numbers decreasing, like we were saying earlier, you get more into the conspiracy theory, but you also get more into the really hardened far-right, like what we've seen a lot of photos since of people being ID'd on the day are kind of Chelsea headhunter types, kind of the real, like, hardened neo-Nazis. There were several Nazi salutes thrown up. That's what's left, is that core, and I think that's obviously... So it's not being complacent when numbers are down, because what's left is a really hard group.
Because there's also this alternate kind of political trend, which is like people being radicalized, which is talked about, people being radicalized on the internet and then going out and shooting people, which, all the opposition in big demonstrations is not going to help when you've got these kind of national action style little grouplets across the country who are being constantly harassed by the state, but we have no idea about or have no answer to. We oppose demonstrations. We don't oppose people plotting terrorist attacks or whatever, which is a whole other issue. But there's that kind of trend as well, which like feeds into like the more extreme nature of what's going on. So Lily, you're an organizer in the London Anti-Fascist Assembly, which I believe was set up earlier this year. Do you want to quickly tell us a bit about maybe why it was set up and what it was trying to achieve when it was set up?
I mean, I got involved when I think the decision was already made to start building it. Because I was only involved in anti-fascist organizing since October last year, due to going to the Feminist anti-fascist Assembly's demo on the 13th of October. I mean, my understanding of it is that due to the demos last summer that were so huge from the far right, where like 15,000 people marched on the streets, there was an understanding that anti-fascist and anti-racist groups needs to come together and organize as a coalition or as an assembly, so that we have bigger numbers on the streets and can have an effective response to the far right, and are able to form also a political analysis of them, and through that be more effective in fighting them. The aim is to be a mass mobilizing platform. We're not quite there yet, but I think it's like something closer to, like, for instance, in Berlin, they're able to mobilize hundreds of thousands of people at a short notice on the streets, and it's like families, kids, dogs, grannies, everybody, and they feel that it's their duty to be on the streets and oppose the far right or racists or whoever they're counter protesting. And here it's kind of like we get hundreds of thousands of people on the streets against Brexit and all this like liberal bullshit, where it's like a white people's family day out, a little stroll through central London, which doesn't really do anything. Even if there's 1 million people on the street, it doesn't do anything. It didn't stop the Iraq war either. So it's more like it's a sign that people are unhappy, but it's people who go on demos maybe once or twice a year. And then they feel that they've done something, but they don't organize and don't effectively come together and build movements. They just go to these demos and then they feel like they've done their good duty of the day. And anti-fascist organizing is more like we have a direct goal in stopping the far right from organizing and opposing them on the streets when, I mean, at the moment they're really small. So this is a good moment to be on the streets and get bigger numbers and effectively oppose them. So wLAFA is basically trying to do that we can get much, much, much bigger numbers on the streets and people start understanding themselves as everyday anti-fascists, that it's every citizen's duty to be out on the streets and oppose them. And it isn't just about demos. It's about community organizing and benefit gigs and street stalls. And
I was going to kind of go back briefly to kind of origins of wLAFA, and I think it did come in a lot of ways out of the two demos towards the end of last year, the one in October and December, which were kind of both led by the Feminist Anti-Fascist Assembly, which showed the success of kind of assembly-style organising and like real work on coalition building, moving away from black bloc tactics. Not that black bloc doesn't have a place, I think it does, but it can't be the be all and end all, and like that, and it does exclude a lot of people from the organising we're doing. If you want to build a mass movement, it's not going to be a black bloc. And I think the kind of successes in terms of numbers of those two demos were part of that kind of early formation of LAFA. And I think it was I think we're not there yet in terms of having a mass movement, obviously, but we did in the first meeting, the first open LAFA assembly, there were well over 100 people, which you don't see in London. Yeah, it's not tens of thousands on the streets, but it's
there were
something,
150.
Yeah, it's a big growth from what we're used to seeing.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that you both refer back to Feminist Anti-Fascist Assembly, because I feel like LAFA has taken a lot of the strengths from that, like the involvement of a broad group of people, these kind of big, kind of very exciting public meetings, which are quite inspiring when you to participate in a lot of the times. But there's also kind of like a kind of weakness within that assembly model without extra stuff going on. I feel like FAF isn't particularly active right now, and LAFA is also, I feel, struggled with that kind of, how do you get loads of people who come to assemblies and make them become organisers, or make them feel like they want to become organisers, and how do you kind of sustain like a wider like political grouping, or like you said, coalition building beyond the kind of assembly form, which I think we have struggled with in many ways. I kind of look to like places like Portland, where they have this Rose City Antifa, which are your kind of LAF style direct action kind of closed group, and you have Popular Mobilisation, which is a much more kind of a LAFA based thing of building a coalition, getting lots of people into the streets. And I feel like it works so well there because these groups are working much more in synergy with each other. And I feel at the moment there's a kind of very weird split going on in anti-fascism between I don't know how to describe it, between an old guard and a new people, or like I don't know, but I feel like we need to start going towards kind of building those bridges between previous generations and other styles of anti-fascism with LAFA, and making each other think that they're important and needed, because I think they are.
Yeah.
My sense of the split is in anti-fascism, which I think is totally there and needs to be like addressed kind of honestly. It's unfortunate we only have two people from one side of that split on, and not anyone from the other side of the split. But
not that we're saying that you are the splitters or the activist splits or whatever.
No, but like as in like the split seems internal to a moment of struggle that happened 5 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree on the thing of, I think there needs to be a coming together of those two things, because I think the two strategies actually do kind of rely on each other to work, and I don't think they can work completely separately from each other. I think that was part of maybe what LAFA originally was hoping to do and hasn't really managed to do at this point. But I think we do need to start having these conversations out. Like, I think literally just getting people in the same room, because I think it's often not a split where the groups are even hostile to each other. I mean, there are probably individuals that are, but I think as a whole, the two separate groups are not hostile, but they're just never in the same room. They're doing their own separate things.
When you say they need each other, do you mean that they need each other in the sense that some demos are going to be like this and some demos are going to be like the other one? Or do you think that they need each other in the sense that when you organise a demo, it's possible to have like a kind of an autonomous black bloc? Which one of these two things? Or both?
Yeah, both, I think, because I think there's organising big, broad mobilisations, you can't do at short notice. If you want to be countering every single far-right demo, which I'm not actually convinced is necessarily the right thing to do strategically, but if that's what you want to be doing, you're not going to be able to do that with a huge base, because you're not going to get thousands and thousands of people out in London with 1 week notice, 2 weeks notice. But I also think the big mobilisations we did, and the big ones in the second half of last year, did have a black bloc, like a smaller one than you sometimes get. But I think it's good. There's a lot of really experienced anti-fascists who like really know what they're doing on the streets and are really good to have around those mobilisations. I don't think they should be organised entirely apart from each other.
We have two different tendencies in LAFA. One is the people who want action and who want action now and who want to be on the streets and who want to fight the fascists. And the other group is like, let's think about strategies and, like we need to organize training and, like let's just kind of like slow it down a little bit and think about it more and develop it more. And the thing is like, it doesn't mean that one or the other tendency has to win, but we have to figure out how they can exist at the same time so that both can build and both can get stronger and bigger. But we can't go like, no, this is too extreme and this we have to go another way, or like we need to be more militant. It has to satisfy both sides.
Absolutely.
And we haven't figured that out yet.
I think that
how we satisfy both tendencies.
That's the kind of classic organizational design split, right? There's an organization, part of an organization whose purpose is to fulfill the goals of the organization, and there's part of an organization whose goals is to reproduce and structure the organization in such a way that it can fulfill its goals. And these are actually two quite opposed and actually quite antagonistic parts in lots of organizations. And the danger of the one that just wants to kind of fulfill now, the danger of that is that there's no organization in like 2 months' time. And the danger of the other one winning or becoming kind of dominant is that you end up with doing an enormous amount of busy work and nothing happens.
Yeah,
And-
you're just going to be this completely impotent organization
Yeah.
if everybody just kind of like looks at each other.
You both mentioned that the demonstrations, these last two demonstrations, have been quite small from anti-fascists in comparison to like the ones last year. And I just wondered if you could kind of talk about why you thought that was and how we can go about kind of rebuilding that kind of momentum and presence that we had going on last year.
I think last year there was a lot of time and a lot of work was put into building these quite broad coalitions that included like momentum and like various sections of the left of the Labour Party, as well as kind of obviously Feminist Anti-fascist Assembly was there. But then you've got people like Another Europe is Possible. You've got parts of the AFN. Like you've got these, and these coalitions by necessity involved everyone compromising on their politics. Like no one can, in a group with that diverse politics, like no one was really got exactly what they wanted, and they're really hard to build. And I think we need to really think on like trying to put some serious time and like effort back into building up those relationships again.
I think there's a couple of things going on. I think like last year, a lot of those kind of relations were built between a very select group of people, very particular people who personally knew or had connections to other people in other organisations who could like leverage things and make it happen. And that's obviously one way of building a coalition, which is but there's also another way, which is like building like a popular kind of groundswell of like ordinary members, which I feel like is a more like productive path to go down. It was heartwarming to see for the 24th, a number of Hackney and a number of like Labour and Momentum kind of groups saying, we're going to this wLAFA demonstration, we're going to meet up here and we're going to go together. And if we could replicate those kind of things across London, then we would have, or like kind of like by necessity, have many more people coming, because there'd be many more people coming from different parts of London. And you're totally right. You're totally right about the compromise thing. Like people need to kind of, ultimately it's about stopping the far right and fascism from effectively organising and staging these demonstrations, and the only way to do that is to drop a certain part of your politics to work with other people. There's literally no other way about doing it. You can't be like a purist about this, really, I feel.
Should we talk about on a more kind of general level, what we think the kind of big important functions of an anti-fascist organisation are? So one of them is obviously doing demos, right? One of them is obviously organising for anti-fascist marches, most of which follow the kind of rhythm of the far right. Like when there's a far right demo, there's an anti-fascist demo. That's one of the kind of big functions. Obviously, you're going to break that up into sort of different functions aren't below that. But there are actually many more things that anti-fascist organisations could do.
I think there's a lot to be said for moving, and I think this is what's been happening in our internal conversations a lot about wanting to move beyond being reactive. Being reactive is really tiring, and like often like it feels like obviously like the ground zero of our politics is stopping fascists organising in the streets, but like I don't personally really like big like central London set pieces. Like I think they're really important that we do them, but they're not, I don't think they should be the be all and end all of our politics. I think there should be a lot more community organising going on, which is something we talk about doing a lot and then don't do because we get distracted by another central London set piece. I think what I personally would like to see would be kind of community meals in neighbourhoods in London, and ways of kind of bringing communities together in an anti-fascist space, but making it very like open.
So I think education is also a massive part of like an anti-fascist organisation. I feel like there's a very small group of people, like even within anti-fascism, who know a lot about it, about like far-right groups and how they work and who knows who and who is beefing with who and how we can exploit those things. And we need to be educating ourselves about these groups, and we also need to be educating the wider left and the wider London population. I feel like there's many reasons why people don't want to come on demonstrations if they don't think it's necessary, but also if they don't, like literally they don't know about it happening, or they don't know who these people are or why they're demonstrating or what their politics are, they're much less likely to, see a stop Tommy. And if you think, oh, Tommy Robinson, he was a thing 5 years ago, there's no point. And so I feel like a lot of what wLAFA could be doing is kind of like workshops where people can learn about these things, along with the kind of community aspect to the like more social kind of positive relationship building, which is practiced quite successfully also by, I think we should remember, Women's Strike Assembly, who have done these like in the build up to the Women's Strike Day, did these kind of assemblies, but combined with like kind of creches and kind of other kind of events, which knitted together a certain group of people to be able to pull off this thing. And I feel like we could be doing things like that on an ongoing basis.
Yeah, on also what Women's Strike Assembly does, put my other hat on, of actually running stay and plays as a form of which was done on March 8th, but with a political conversation.
March 8th is International Women's Day.
Yeah, thank you. But so it gives the space of like mothers who normally are not going to make it out to like wherever, but doing local ones where people live. And we had some really great conversations, and I think that's potentially a really effective way forward as well.
I mean, for me, the thing is like I'm not an anti-fascist theory buff. Like, I don't know all the, the histories behind that and all of that. Like, my main interest is like the organizing itself and the strategies within that. And I don't necessarily know all of the groups or their particularities, but like my thing is more like, how is the group organized? How do we get this done? What's missing? What do we need to do to make that happen? How do we make sure that people don't burn out? How do we have enough people that some people don't end up doing all of the work and get really exhausted? How does it reliably keep on? What do we need to do so that when there is another counter demonstration that we need to do, that people still keep on working on the background stuff? And we need like people who do the background research. And like there are so many skills that people can bring into that, but I think a lot of people don't even realize what kind of transferable skills they have that they could bring. And a lot of it has to do with confidence, that people don't think that they know enough or can do enough and don't know what the tasks are that they could be doing. And that's something that we need to build. Like, we need to build the people's confidence of like, just ask if you want to do something, ask if you can, like volunteer for something, and we can give you a task and we can show you how to do it. So, and like when we do demos, we need like stewards and we need medics and we need this and that. So there are so many areas where we should be doing the training in.
Hopefully we'll also have some open trainings for some of those skills coming up soon. That I think that's in the pipe works loosely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a few obvious things that wLAFA could be doing. I'm not making any prescriptions, but obviously wLAFA had 2 assemblies already, and I feel like maybe it's due another one. Which we're currently kind of affirming kind of things where people came together, and we could make much better use of those things. I feel like the regional kind of meetings would also be useful, and that kind of granular coalition building work where you like just reach out to every single group in a local area you can think of, and that's like broadly defined as like Labour left momentum onwards to community groups and whatever. Try and get them into a room and get them talking and start building those kind of relationships. I think is also another useful function of LAFA.
So people who have been inspired by listening to this talk of the multiplicity of things there are to do in LAFA, where can they contact you?
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or our email, londonafa@riseup.net. Like, I think one thing that we don't talk about enough is that a lot of people are scared of Antifa and their image. Like, anti-fascism is a scary word for a lot of people, and they don't understand what it actually means.
Why do you think that is?
Because they just see this, like the image that they have of that is like of Black Bloc, and that their primary purpose is violence. And they don't understand the reasons of it, and they don't understand that anti-fascism is much, much more than just going out on the streets and opposing the far right. Like, there's so much more to it.
Well, of course, I just want to add the caveat that, like, kind of physical force fascism, anti-fascism, or violent anti-fascism obviously is necessary as well, I feel.
Yeah. Like, I'm not that's not the message that I want to put out. That it isn't. It is essential that we have the Black Bloc, and they are really important, and they're important at the demos to keep people safe, because when the far right managed to kind of run down a side street and try to attack people, the Black Bloc is there to keep the other people, the more vulnerable people at the demo, safe. Like, they're the defensive line.
I think also that very specific image of anti-fascism is coming a lot from the media, and especially it's actually transposing a lot of what's gone on in the US in really interesting. There was essentially a US media scare about Antifa, which they say in a really weird way.
I think the reason why they say it in the weird way is because of the same reason why they call it marijuana. Is because it was attempted to make it kind of more foreign in the early 20th century.
Yeah, Antifa, which sounds like this big scary thing that you don't know what it is, and the media's telling you is bad. And I think that conversation has been transported, I think, very deliberately. I mean, a lot of the far right groups in the UK are directly funded by groups in the US. So there's also quite an easy narrative that's been transported across the Atlantic, I think.
And it's interesting, actually, just when you bring that up, that the far-right kind of journalist, in inverted commas, Andy No, was at the 24th demonstration in central London, taking photos, making a video. He accused you in LAFA of
so bizarre.
Of blocking roads and setting off smoke flares as if you basically saying you were protesting, I guess.
But the thing is, like his whole videos and threads online, he didn't even manage to say anything bad about us. It was, they walked on the streets, they protested, traffic couldn't go through, but that was kind of it.
But
he couldn't even spin it in any
But to
kind
his
of way.
audience, that's enough, isn't it? That video, because he's targeting a very specific audience who have already decided that anti-fascist bad.
Yeah. I mean, you're totally right. He's speaking to a particular audience, and I feel like it is quite significant that he came over. And it does speak to that kind of transportation of there's a wider kind of criminalization of Antifa, which Shane Burley has talked about in relation to the Green Scare in the early 2000s in America, where he's kind of positing that the next kind of scare is going to be an anti-fascist scare, where a lot of people are going to be put away for a certain amount of time, and it's something that needs to be guarded against for sure. I feel like we did a whole episode on Andy No, and I feel like he's not a person who can be going away anytime soon, especially when we've had these revelations about him of being inside planning meetings of Patriots Prayer and the Proud Boys and being their kind of unofficial PR person, releasing their reports and going on scouting things for them and stuff. He's quite an effective kind of figure in that he's treated from CNN to Fox to CBS to all these as actual journalist instead of who he is, which is a far-right activist. So thank you for talking to us, Ella and Lily. If you really like what you heard or you want to support the show in any way, you can follow us on Twitter, or you can give us money on our Patreon, which is patreon.com/12Rules for what, and you can give as little as $2, but you can also now give $5 a month or even $10 a month.
There are some great perks.
We have a SoundCloud, and you can follow us on all the kind of podcast platforms. It's also really helpful if you just recommend us to your friends or quote tweet us. Our handle is at 12Rules for what. That really does help us gain a profile and help more people find the show and listen to it, and
And very soon there's going to be a very big, exciting change in the 12 Rules for What ecology. I'm not going to give you any more information.
We're branching out into new territory.
12 Rules.